The fluorescent lights over Pump 6 crackled like angry hornets. Amara Pierce pinched her last $10 between two fingers, the next morning's breakfast for her 6-year-old, and told herself not to look. Don't look. Keep walking. Then the sound hit. A wet, strangled gasp. A mountain of a man in a black leather vest staggered by the ice chest, hand clawing at his chest, lips turning the wrong color. He dropped to his knees. The vest patches flashed in the light. Skull, rockers, reputation, and every story she'd been warned about roared in her head. "Hey," the clerk shouted from the door. "Don't get involved." "Those guys?" "Trouble." A trucker paused, shook his head, and mumbled as he backed away. "Walk on, miss. You've got a kid to think about." Amara did. Nova's inhaler. "Ain't du, busfea." Dinner stretched into a whisper. Her grandma's voice cut through the panic anyway. "Kindness costs nothing, baby. Sometimes it's all we got." The biker's chest stopped moving. Amara's phone found one bar and dropped the 911 call. No. She sprinted into the store, tore a bottle of aspirin and a water from the shelf, and slapped the 10 on the counter. "That's $6.50, the clerk said. "Not moving. Keep the change." She knelt on the cold concrete, lifting the man's head. "Look at me. Chew these." His eyes fluttered. He obeyed. She tipped the water. "Good. Stay with me." "Stay right here." A headlight blaze sliced the lot. A second bike slid in. A younger rider, sharp eyes, Viet tats curling up his neck, killed the engine and ran. "Boss!" He dropped beside them, stunned at the sight. You helped him?" "He needed help," Amara said, voice steady, hands not. "Sirens are close." The man on the ground worked his jaw around the last of the pills. His hand lifted, shaky, and closed around her wrist. "Name," he rasped through the oxygenless air. "Amara Pierce. Tell them." He swallowed hard. "Reaper sent you, Reaper." Even she'd heard it. A name people crossed streets to avoid. Blue wash bathed the pumps. Paramedics swarmed. One glanced at the open aspirin, then at Amara. "You did good. Right time, right dose. Might have saved him." They loaded Reaper. The younger rider, Diesel, stitched in gray on his vest, stood, rattled and reverent. He reached into his wallet. "No," Amara said, already rising. "I don't want your money." "Then take this." He pressed a plain white card into her palm. Minimal, a phone number, and a tiny sparrow with a halo. "Call tomorrow." "He'll want to thank you." The ambulance doors thumped shut. Sirens peeled into the night, dragging her heartbeat with them. The lot returned to its buzz and hum like nothing had happened. The clerk lit a cigarette. The trucker was long gone. Amara stared at the card. At the single $1.50 change left in her pocket. At her cracked sneakers, the hole in the left sole smiling up at her like a dare. She walked the 2 miles home under streetlights that blinked like tired eyes. Nova slept on the neighbor's couch, breath soft and easy. Amara tucked her into bed, then opened the spiral notebook by the window and wrote her nightly. 3. Nova is safe. A. Eun, stranger, is still breathing. Tomorrow is a new day. She set the sparrow and halo card on the nightstand and lay in the dark, not knowing that across town a legend in a hospital gown was saying one sentence to a room full of writers. Find her. Question for my viewer. Would you spend your last $10 to help a stranger? Drop "I would" or "I'm not sure" in the comments. Morning sunlight slipped through the torn blinds of Amara's apartment, landing on an almost empty cereal box and an overdue rent notice stuck to the fridge. The night before kept replaying. The man gasping for air, the trembling hand, the way his eyes searched hers before the ambulance took him away. She poured the last bit of milk into Nova's cereal bowl. The carton made that hollow sound that meant empty. "Eat up, baby," Amara said softly. "Why aren't you eating, Mommy?" Nova asked, her tiny spoon clinking against the bowl. Amara smiled faintly. "Because I'm full of joy already." It was a lie she'd practiced, gentle, protective, and meant to make the world feel less heavy for her child. Outside, Miss Etta Brooks, her 60-year-old neighbor with kind eyes and sharp words, stood on her porch sipping coffee. "I heard what you did last night," she said as Amara walked by. "Helping one of those bikers? You could have been killed, girl." "He was dying, Miss Etta." Amara replied, clutching her worn tote. I couldn't just leave him there. Miss Etta sighed. Kindness is good, baby, but sometimes it don't keep the lights on. At the laundromat, the rhythmic hum of dryers couldn't drown out her thoughts. She folded shirts in silence, each crease matching the tension in her chest. Her coworker Lila slid beside her, wiping her hands. You're too quiet today. Something wrong? Amara hesitated, then told her everything. The gas station, the biker, the aspirin, the $10 that was supposed to feed Nova. Lila's eyes widened. You used your last money to save a stranger. That's incredible. Amara shrugged. It didn't feel incredible. It just felt right. Her shift ended early. She walked to the diner where she worked nights, sat in her usual back booth, and stared at the small white card the biker's friend had given her. The Sparrow and Halo logo shimmered faintly under the fluorescent light. What does this even mean? She whispered, tracing the edge. Her phone buzzed on the table. Unknown number. She hesitated. It rang again. She swallowed and answered. Miss Pierce? The voice was male, calm, familiar. Yes? This is Diesel. I was there last night. The man you helped, Reaper, he's out of the hospital. He'd like to meet you. Today. Harbor Diner. 3 o'clock. Amara's throat tightened. Why? He doesn't forget people who do good, Diesel said. He just wants to thank you. For a moment, Amara said nothing. Her instincts warred between fear and curiosity. Finally, she exhaled. I'll think about it. When she left work, 2 motorcycles were parked across the street. Their riders stood beside them, calm, steady. When Amara glanced their way, both nodded. Slow, respectful. She hugged her coat tighter and whispered to herself, what did I just step into? Question for viewers. If the person whose life you saved wanted to meet you the next day, would you go? The diner's glass door reflected Amara's anxious face as she stood outside, her hands gripping the strap of her worn-out bag. The sign above flickered Harbor Diner, open 24 hours. She hesitated. Inside, she could see them, bikers, a dozen at least. Their leather vests marked with the same insignia she'd seen on that man's chest, the winged skull. Just go in, say thank you and leave, she whispered to herself. When she pushed open the door, the bell chimed and silence rippled through the room. Every head turned toward her. Tough faces, tattooed arms, rough beards, but not one of them looked angry. They were simply watching. A tall man stood up from a booth in the corner. Diesel, the one who'd called her. Miss Pierce, he said, voice low but warm. You came. I almost didn't, she admitted. I'm glad you did. He gestured toward the back. He's waiting for you. Every step through that diner felt heavier. The air hummed with engines and memory. When she reached the last booth, she saw him. Reaper, the man from last night, now sitting upright, alive, and breathing. The same weathered face, the same rough hands, but his eyes were different now, clearer, human. Sit down, he said, voice hoarse but steady. Amara sat across from him. You look better. He nodded slowly. Thanks to you, she shook her head. I just did what anyone would do. He gave a dry laugh that sounded like gravel. No, ma'am. Most people cross the street when they see me coming. You stopped. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photograph. A smiling little girl between 2 parents, both younger and brighter than the man in front of her. This was my daughter, he said quietly. Lena. She passed 5 years ago. Heart condition. We didn't have the money for surgery. Since then, I've been trying to make things right, helping people who help others. It's how I honor her. Amara's eyes softened. I'm sorry. He looked at her, his gaze heavy but kind. You used your last $10 to save a stranger's life. That's something money can't buy. That's the kind of heart this world's starving for. He slid a small white envelope across the table. This is for you. She shook her head instantly. No, I don't want— It's not payment, he interrupted. It's gratitude. You gave me back time, and that's something I can't ever repay. Inside the envelope was another card. The same sparrow with a halo, embossed this time, and an address scribbled in pen. Tomorrow morning, he said. Come here. It's important. Amara stared at him, confused. What's going to happen? He smiled faintly. You'll see. As she walked out of the diner, every biker stood up as she passed. Not one spoke, not one smiled, but each nodded as if saluting her silently. Outside, the wind cut through her jacket, but she didn't shiver. For the first time in years, something inside her felt warm. The next morning began with a strange quiet. No alarm, no rush, just stillness. Amara opened her eyes to soft daylight slipping through the blinds and the sound of her daughter humming in the kitchen. "Mommy, I made breakfast." Nova chirped proudly, holding up a single piece of toast sprinkled with sugar. Amara smiled, her chest tight with emotion. "That's perfect, baby." For a moment everything felt normal, almost peaceful. But then she remembered the card on her nightstand. The one with the address. The one Reaper told her to visit. She picked it up again, tracing the sparrow with a halo. Below it, written in pen, were just 3 words. "Don't be afraid." Her mind raced. What if Miss Etta was right? What if she'd brought danger into her life? At 7:15 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Firm but calm. Her heart jumped. Through the peephole, she saw 2 men in leather vests standing quietly, hands clasped in front of them. She opened the door halfway. "Miss Pierce?" One of them said politely. "We're here to escort you." "Escort me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Reaper's request." "You're safe with us." She hesitated but looked down at Nova, who was still in her pajamas, clutching her little stuffed bunny. "You'll stay with Miss Etta, okay?" Nova frowned. "Are you in trouble, Mommy?" Amara forced a smile. "No, baby. I'm just going to see a friend." Outside, the street buzzed with confusion. Curtains moved. Neighbors peered out. Even Miss Etta came running across the yard, her robe fluttering. "Lord have mercy, what's all this?" she cried. "You going somewhere with them?" Amara nodded slowly. "I think I am." Etta grabbed her hand. "Child, I don't like this." "You did your part. Let them go their way." Amara looked her in the eyes. "If I don't go, I'll never know what it meant." 2 motorcycles idled at the curb. Amara climbed onto the back of one, clutching her small bag. The engines roared to life, deep, thunderous, shaking the morning air. Windows opened, people gasped. They rode out of the neighborhood, through the cold wind and quiet streets, until the horizon opened to a wide industrial lot by the docks. Dozens of motorcycles were parked there, lined up in perfect rows. Chrome glinted in the sunlight like an army of mirrors. At the center stood Reaper, waiting beside a truck trailer. He raised his hand in greeting as Amara approached. "You came," he said, smiling faintly. "I didn't have much of a choice," she replied nervously. "There's always a choice. You made yours last night. Now it's our turn," he gestured to the trailer. "Open it." When the metal doors swung wide, Amara gasped. Inside were boxes stacked floor to ceiling. Food, furniture, clothing, children's toys, everything a family could need. "For you," Reaper said softly. "And for anyone else who's ever had to choose between kindness and survival." Her voice trembled. "Why me?" "Because you saw a man, not a label." By the time Amara's bus rumbled back into her neighborhood that morning, the air already felt charged, like a storm waiting to break. She didn't notice it at first, not until she turned onto her street and saw the crowd. People were standing on porches, peeking out from windows, talking in hushed voices. Miss Etta stood frozen on her steps, a phone in one hand, her eyes wide. Then Amara heard it. The sound. Deep, unmistakable. Engines. One by one, motorcycles appeared at the end of the street. Not 2, not 10, dozens, maybe 100. They rolled in slow, steady, gleaming under the morning sun like a wall of chrome and thunder. Every house vibrated from the sound. Neighbors gasped. Mothers pulled children back inside. Someone shouted, "Call the cops!" Another whispered, "They're here for her." Miss Etta dropped her phone. "Lord Jesus, Amara! What did you do?" Amara stood still on the sidewalk, clutching Nova's hand. Her heart thudded in her chest, but not from fear. Somehow she knew this wasn't revenge. It felt different, organized, intentional. The line of bikes stopped in front of her apartment. The noise died one engine at a time until there was silence, heavy and complete. Then Reaper stepped off his motorcycle. No sunglasses, no helmet. Just his weathered face and soft eyes. He nodded once to Amara. "Morning." The neighbors pressed closer. "We don't want trouble here," someone shouted. Reaper turned to the crowd, his deep voice steady. "We didn't come for trouble." "We came for gratitude." He pointed at Amara. "This woman spent her last $10 to save a stranger's life. That stranger was me." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Reaper continued. "She didn't ask who I was. Didn't care about the jacket, the rumors, the tattoos. She saw a man dying and chose kindness. And because of that, I get to stand here today." Cole, the younger biker, climbed onto the back of a truck and unlatched the doors. The crowd leaned forward. Inside, stacked high, were boxes marked Lena's Promise Foundation. "This is food, furniture, school supplies, and funds for anyone on this street who's struggling," Cole said. "And it's just the beginning." Miss Etta's mouth fell open. You're giving all this away?" Reaper nodded. "Because one woman reminded me what humanity looks like." Amara covered her mouth as tears filled her eyes. "I don't understand," she whispered. Reaper stepped closer. "You don't need to. You gave without asking for anything. Now it's our turn." He reached into his jacket, pulled out a folded paper, and handed it to her. "This is your new address," he said. She frowned. "What do you mean?" Behind him, 2 men rolled out a small car from the trailer, a red compact, freshly cleaned. Reaper smiled. "You've got a new home, and this. You won't walk to work again." Amara couldn't speak. Her hand shook as she covered her mouth, tears spilling freely. Nova squeezed her arm and whispered, "Mommy, are we rich now?" Amara laughed through her tears. "No, baby. We're just seen." That afternoon, the entire neighborhood buzzed like never before. What had started as fear turned into disbelief, and then into something else. Awe. The bikers unloaded boxes one by one, forming lines like a well-rehearsed army of givers. Food crates, mattresses, school bags, medicine, baby formula, every item carefully handled, not thrown or tossed. Children peeked from windows as the roar of engines faded into laughter. Someone turned on a portable radio, and soon music drifted through the air. For the first time in months, Amara's street didn't sound tired. It sounded alive. Reaper stood on the sidewalk beside Amara, watching it all unfold. "You see this?" he said quietly. "One small act can move mountains. You just pushed the first one." Amara wiped her eyes. "You could have just said thank you. Why do all this?" He looked down at his hands. The same hands she'd seen shaking in pain just days ago. "Because no one ever stopped for me before. You did. I owe it to you. And to her." He pulled a small locket from his jacket. The same little girl's photo he'd shown her in the diner. "Lena always said people aren't bad, they're just scared. You reminded me she was right." Across the street, Miss Etta walked over slowly, her face pale but softened. "Mr. Reaper, sir," she said, voice trembling. "I misjudged you. I thought you were trouble. I'm sorry." Reaper smiled faintly. "You were protecting your own. That's what good people do." Cole appeared holding a clipboard, calling out addresses. "Miss Pierce." "Yes?" "We've cleared your rent, and your light bill's paid for 6 months. You'll find groceries, furniture, and toys for Nova inside. But that's not all." He handed her another envelope. "Inside is an offer. Reaper wants you to see it." Amara opened it slowly. Her hands shook as she read, "Lena's Promise Foundation Community Outreach Coordinator, 50,000-year full benefits starting day 1. Her knees nearly buckled. This can't be real." Reaper grinned. "It's as real as the kindness you gave. The neighbors, who once hid behind curtains, now stepped forward, offering hands, hugs, even apologies." Mr. Johnson, who had shouted earlier, muttered, "Guess we were wrong." Miss Etta wiped her eyes and added, "Baby, you turned this whole block into a sermon." Amara looked at Nova, who was giggling with the bikers as they unpacked toys. For the first time in a long time, the little girl's laugh didn't echo in an empty room. It blended with community, warmth, and joy. The sun dipped low, painting everything gold. Amara stood in the middle of it all, surrounded by the same people who once doubted her, embraced now by strangers who'd become family. Reaper placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Tomorrow morning, we start building something here. A place where no one has to walk alone again." Question for viewers. If one act of compassion could rebuild your whole community, would you have the courage to start it? 2 months passed, but the memory of that thunderous morning still echoed in Amara's mind. Only now, the engines no longer symbolized fear. They symbolized hope. The construction site on the corner of her street buzzed with energy. Trucks came and went, walls went up, children watched from the sidewalks, and every brick carried a story. Above the entrance of the half-built structure hung a banner with the logo of a sparrow and halo, Lena's Promise Foundation. Reaper stood beside Amara, his beard dusted with cement. "You ever built something from the ground up?" She smiled faintly. "Just a life," he chuckled. "Same thing." The sign on the blueprint read, Clark House, Community Center. Amara stared at it, her name printed in bold letters. "You're naming it after me?" Reaper shrugged. "You gave it its heartbeat." The center would have everything: a food bank, after-school tutoring, a free clinic, and a small office where Amara would work. Her job title still felt unreal every time she saw it: Community Outreach Coordinator. That morning, the local news arrived. A young reporter with a camera crew approached her. "Miss Pierce, how does it feel to have a community center named after you?" Amara hesitated, then smiled softly. "It's not about my name. It's about what happens when people stop judging and start helping." Nova tugged her hand, pointing to a room full of books. "Mommy, can I pick one?" "Every single one," Amara said, kneeling to her. "Because this place is for you." As the camera rolled, Amara shared her story, not for fame, but for truth. "A year ago, I had $10 to my name. I used it to help a stranger everyone told me to avoid. That moment changed everything. But the real miracle isn't what I got. It's what we built." Reaper nodded proudly in the background, his arms crossed. "Told you. Kindness is contagious," he muttered to Cole. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the rooftops, the street once filled with fear now glowed with laughter. Neighbors grilled food, bikers played catch with kids, and music filled the air. Miss Etta served lemonade, handing Amara a cup. "You know, baby, I was wrong about those men." Amara smiled. "You weren't wrong to be afraid. You were wrong to stop at fear." The two women stood together, watching Nova ride her new bike, one of the first gifts from the foundation. The sound of her laughter carried through the block like a hymn. Reaper walked up beside them, leaning on his cane. "We're opening next week. You ready?" Amara nodded, eyes glistening. "I was born ready. Just didn't know it." He smiled, tipping his head. "Good, because this is just the beginning." A year later, the same street that once trembled with engines now pulsed with laughter and life. Clark House stood proudly on the corner, its white walls shining in the sunlight, its doors always open. Children raced their bikes up and down the block, murals painted by local artists covered the walls, and a small plaque at the entrance read, "Built on $10 and courage." For every act of kindness that changes the world. Amara stood before a crowd gathered for the one-year anniversary of Clark House. Neighbors, bikers, reporters, families, even the mayor. Nova sat in the front row wearing a tiny vest that said, "Little Legacy Helper." Reaper stood off to the side, his arms crossed proudly, his weathered eyes soft. Amara stepped to the microphone, her voice trembling at first, then growing steady. "A year ago, I was a tired mother with $10 in my pocket and a decision to make. I could have walked away from a man who scared me, or I could help him. I chose to help, and that choice brought us all here today." The crowd clapped softly. She continued, "People told me kindness was weakness, that it wouldn't feed my daughter or pay my rent, but kindness paid in ways money never could. It gave us a community. It gave us faith." She paused, her gaze falling on Reaper. "That man I helped? He taught me that no one is too rough to be redeemed, no one too broken to rebuild." Reaper nodded, emotion flickering in his eyes. Amara smiled, tears shining in the corners of hers. "This building isn't mine. It's ours. For every mother afraid to hope, for every child who needs a safe place, for every person who thinks kindness doesn't matter. It does. It changes everything." The crowd rose in applause. The sound was thunderous, but not like the roar of engines that had once frightened the neighborhood. This was different, softer, warmer, made of love instead of noise. After the ceremony, a teenage boy approached Amara, his hands shaking. "Ma'am, my mom said you helped her pay rent last winter. She wanted me to tell you. She got a job. She's doing okay now." Amara knelt, smiling. "Then tell your mom it's her turn now. Help someone else." The boy nodded, eyes full of light. As the crowd began to leave, Reaper joined her on the steps. "You know," he said quietly, "you didn't just save my life that night. You gave me a reason to live it right." She smiled gently. "Guess we both got saved then." The camera crew packed up, and the sun dipped behind the rooftops, casting gold over the faces of people who once feared each other, now family. Amara's says, "Kindness doesn't ask who you are before it gives. It just gives. If you believe one small act can change a life, start with yours." If this story touched your heart, don't just scroll. Share it. Subscribe and spread kindness forward. Because sometimes the smallest act becomes someone's miracle.